Hello, everyone. I am just thrilled and excited to be able to share this episode of Plug Into Devin with you. We have Brian Moench with us. Brian is a practicing anesthesiologist, an MD. He is the president, one of the founders of Utah Physicians for the Healthy Environment. He is famous for his activism on behalf of clean air in Utah, going back a decade and a half. I'm so thrilled to have him here. So stick around. You don't want to miss this episode. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Devin.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. What do you want to talk about today, Brian?
Well, the kinds of issues that are in our normal repertoire, and by that I mean our Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, have shifted a little bit with the pandemic. And that's obviously the first thing on everybody's mind. And most recently, the community has been, and rightly so, focused very much on the issue of can we reopen schools or should we be reopening schools? And this issue came to a head for me and our group when teachers recently approached us with their concerns about whether or not schools in Utah were going to be reopened safely. So we looked into it with a great deal of care, and we concluded that the teacher's concern was scientifically legitimate. And it didn't seem to us like there was a lot of scientific justification for all this patchwork approach that has developed within the state and within the country, for that matter, with a whole variety, a basket full of different guidelines as to what really constitutes a safe reopening of schools. So I think we're now seeing that, in fact, the teachers' concerns were legitimate, and we have real concerns about what's going to happen in the community when schools open here in Utah. We think that it's basically going to reignite the pandemic in the community, and we wouldn't be a bit surprised if we find a month later that all the schools are shutting down again.
That is a scary premise. Is there a model in your mind, based on your research and your expertise, is there a model for reopening schools, or is it simply not possible at this time?
Well, the most credible organizations, including the World Health Organization and organizations and pandemic experts in the United States, say that the first characteristics of a community in terms of whether or not they could be considered qualified to open up schools is what is the background rate of the infection in the community. And the metric that is commonly used to determine that is whether or not there is a 5% positive rate of testing or more. If it's 5% or higher, most experts have concluded that that means there's too much infection in the community to risk opening up. Now, Utah obviously varies a little bit from time to time, but most recently we've been in the neighborhood of 8 to 10%. So if you start there with that as perhaps the most important metric, then right off the bat, we don't qualify. And then there are a lot of other things that you can consider, like how do you protect students? Well, the first thing to consider, of course, is mask wearing. That seems to be increasingly recognized as probably the primary way that people can avoid transmitting the virus from one to another. It was distressing for me to read that, in fact, a recent poll found that something like slightly more than 40% of people in Utah weren't at all interested in wearing masks in public. That's very distressing. And then there are other aspects of protection that most people are now familiar with, which are social distancing, being at least 6 feet away. However, the 6-foot distance that people hear so much about is a little bit arbitrary, because certainly there are circumstances where singing or coughing or sneezing may transmit the virus much further than 6 feet. But you have mask wearing, you have 6 foot of social distancing, you have plexiglass barriers. For adults like teachers that are in the classroom, I think it would be wise to have more protection than just a mask, like, for instance, a face shield. One of the things that is not getting anywhere near enough attention is whether or not the ventilation system, the indoor atmosphere, is really as safe as it could be. Frankly, we should be opening all the windows. we can possibly open, because there seems to be an overwhelming amount of evidence now that there's a tremendous difference between the risk of being indoors with other people compared to being outdoors. One of the teachers told me with great concern that we can't open the windows anymore, and it relates to some sort of policy enacted after concerns were raised about school shootings. I'm not sure quite how that fits into this, but nonetheless, we need to be opening windows as much as possible. We need as much outdoor air as we can get. Now, in addition to that, we also need better and higher grade filtration systems and ventilation systems. We need to be filtering that air. We need to be adding room air purifiers in every classroom. In fact, we started making that recommendation about 10 months ago, not because of the pandemic, because obviously nobody was aware of it at that point, but because room air purifiers are significantly helpful in reducing pollution levels in classrooms. And studies have shown that, in fact, if you reduce the pollution levels in a classroom, even from a fairly low level of pollution, children learn better, they get better test scores. And so filtering out the air in the classroom is perhaps as important as anything there is. In fact, researchers made it comparable to, in fact, a little more effective than reducing class size in terms of educating students. So we were already trying to make that recommendation on that basis, but now that just gives us all the more reason to make that recommendation in this circumstance, because the virus can attach itself to these pollution particles, which facilitates the transmission. And add to that the fact that we also know that the pollution particles make people a little more ill. And if you're going to have a slightly higher rate of respiratory infections among school children because of the air pollution they're breathing, they will be more susceptible to an infection. So for multiple reasons, we're trying to get public traction for the idea that every school classroom needs its own individual air purifier. Obviously, hand sanitation is critical. An adequate supply of personal protective equipment, i.e. masks and gloves and so forth. We don't see that the school districts have really made that kind of preparation in advance of school opening. So we're very concerned that this is not going to go well. And quite frankly, and tragically, we're going to see some people die from this who shouldn't have. Now, are we in favor of kids being in school? Absolutely, but only if everything's safe. And the only way to do that is with an awful lot more preparation and money spent in making it safe.
And that may require, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that may require support from the federal government that isn't yet on offer. And of course, as one who's running for Congress, I'm thoughtful about that issue.
The federal government has resolutely failed in their responsibilities. We desperately needed a national strategy, a national testing program, a national distribution of the equipment necessary to keep people safe, the equipment necessary to keep healthcare workers safe. That never happened. And so to me, this has ended up to be as ludicrous as, let's say Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, and we're going to tell every 50 states, will you go handle the war against Japan all by yourself? Utah,
you feel best.
Utah, you go build an aircraft carrier. Wyoming, you go build some warships. It's ludicrous. Well, that would be no more ludicrous than what we've done at the federal level.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Before you go, tell people how they can learn more about Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment and how they can connect with you personally.
We're very active in social media. We have a very active Facebook page, and we post the most relevant scientific research and articles on current events related to environmental degradation, pollution, and the pandemic. We are making a post at least an average of 1 or 2 a day on our Facebook page. We have a very active website, uphe.org, where we post things that have a little more lengthy opportunity for people to get engaged and have a little more staying power than just immediate current events. And then if anybody wants to reach out to me personally, I'm happy to answer their questions. My email is drmoench@yahoo.com. We're here to try and protect public health as best we can. We're trying to shape public policy in the direction of cleaner air, and that's a very heavy lift. But I think we're fighting on the right side of all of these issues, and we want the public behind us.
Thank you very much, Brian. We're so grateful for all that you've done. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We wish you every success in your efforts to improve public health.
Thank you very much for having me, Devin.
All righty. Let's be bold together.
Absolutely.
I'm Devin Thorpe. For the last 8 years, I've been working full-time to eradicate extreme poverty, improve global health, and fight climate change. I've concluded that the best way for me to continue my work is to run for Congress to represent the people of Utah's 3rd District. In Utah, we have common shared values. Those things unite us. I believe passionately in our ability to come together, and I believe that working together, we can solve Utah's problems. I'm Devin Thorpe. I'm a Democrat. I'm running to represent the people of Utah's 3rd District.
I'm Devin Thorpe, a candidate for Congress, and I approved this message.